Welcome, SPG players, to another episode of an unexpected podcast. And with me, I have Alisher, my co-host Evan, and Matt Iverson. And today we're going to be going over a huge accomplishment for the Team USA. We got second place.
Don't spoil it.
Sorry, you didn't hear that.
He just spoiled it. Because none of our listeners ever actually use the internet and would have access to the information unless we told them.
This is true. All right. I'm sorry for all of you who do not have access to the internet.
Yeah, that's right.
So we'll tell you what place we got at the team championships at Ardacon. That's actually where we're filming this right now here at Articon. And we're just going to kind of go over the highlights of our rounds. Just talk about what list we brought, how we thought the list performed, and just overall thoughts of the entire tournament. So with that being said, Alisher, what was your first round at Articon?
Yeah,
and talk about the list also. What list did you bring?
Yeah, so I brought Survivors of Lake Town, but I really focused on numbers. I didn't take Alfred, which I don't know that I regret. I had 48 models, Alfred. I had Bard, the girls, Hilda, and Gandalf on horse. The first round that I played was to the death against a guy named Joe. He was playing Rangers of Athelion. Really, at face value, not a very terrifying matchup for survivors, but the way the board was set up, I had to kind of go through the middle with a bunch of terrain, and effectively he was able to castle in between. And I think the immediate highlight of that game was to start the first few rounds of combat. He had killed 17 of my models to me killing 3. So that was really frightening, but eventually I was able to kind of poke a hole through the one side and then come around back, and I was able to really win just by getting the victory points that I needed.
So this Rangers of Athelion had Gollum, or not Gollum. Gollum, Frodo, the Legion, essentially.
I think all of the heroes with Damrod. It had 37 models in it, but for whatever reason,
nobody ever invites Damrod.
No, poor Damrod.
Yeah.
Only losers take Damrod.
Shut
up. So, all right. Win-loss?
I was able to win.
Win for Alisher on the first round. So
with my oath, I was able to get
with the oath. So we're going to talk about these oaths. There's oaths at Articon where you essentially can earn an extra tournament point just for accomplishing sort of a side mission. So we'll talk about those, but they really only matter in the placement, not the game itself that we're in. So as far as my first round, I actually played Goblin Town. For those of you who are shocked by it, I'm shocked too. Matt Iverson convinced me to play the army, and I went ahead and went into this GT, I think with only, 4 or 5, maybe max practice games.
Something like that, yep.
So I didn't really know how to play it.
It almost drives itself.
Yeah, exactly. It's an auto-win army. So I went against Azog's Legion for my first round, and although Azog's Legion is not considered competitive, the player piloting the army was actually a competitive player. And I think the only reason I ended up doing so well against him is he just didn't anticipate some of the tricks. So I ended up moving 7 inches away from his army. I moved 7 inches away from the Goblin King. So basically that 1/8 inch, I had a full range to actually throw a Goblin into a combat anywhere. Goblin King was perched on a ledge with a Goblin. He charged in Azog's Legion, and then I threw a Goblin at Azog, went ahead and mited the 5 to a 6 that I needed, and dismounted him, which caused a lot of problems for him. Then brought the Goblin King in with Gollum, just assassinated his ogres that were hurling through my lines, causing issues, and the rest of my goblins were able to swarm and completely destroy the army from there. Using piercing strikes, I think huge for Goblin Town, because otherwise they have a huge amount of problems actually wounding. But unlike what you're going to hear going forward, this one is the closest to an auto win that I would say I had. To the death. We all did to the death in the first round, and I completely tabled this army with minimal casualties. So, but you wouldn't, from the matchup, think that the player was competitive, but he actually was a very good bridge player. So, Evan, what was your army, and what did you play against in the first round?
So for people who have seen our other episode, I took the exact same thing that I took to Masters and Last Chance qualifiers, which was Pure Minister. So for those of you who have actually seen our previous list review episode, I decided to last minute change my list to Minas Tirith. And I'd say overall, I was happy with that change. I played, I think, a grand total of 1 practice game against Devon's Goblin Town.
Yeah.
The day that lists were due. And then I played no other practice games. But going into this tournament, I had 10 games of practice with them, those being the last chance qualifiers and the Masters. So I was decently seasoned with the army at this point. It was to the death. And I played against Tom Moore, who actually is a very well-seasoned player, if I remember correctly. He played quite competitively many, many years ago. And he was taking a Far-Harad Serpent Horde alliance with a lot of half-trolls, which I was very scared of, including Sulan and 2 Mahud Kings, so a lot of hitting power. I ended up killing a lot of guys with shooting, and when combat hit, that ended up helping me a lot. I was basically able to use Boromir to effectively get around behind him because he had so few models. I was able to get in, kill a Mahud King, get into Suladan, kill him as well, and I got my oath by killing the Mahud King with Boromir. So Boromir was really the MVP of that game, and will probably be the MVP of most games as well. I guess I'll keep a tally of the bolt thrower as well. The bolt thrower was not great in that game. I think it killed.
Yeah, you had a bolt thrower in your list.
Oh yes, I did throw in a bolt thrower. The thought process behind that was I took Boromir, and basically what I wanted to do was get as many models on the table as possible to benefit from the flag. So I took the cheapest heroes there. So I took Madril, and then I took everybody's favorite hero, Damrod.
Only losers take Damrod.
Yeah, I won this game, strangely.
Doesn't mean you're not a loser.
So I filled all of the war bands with troops, and then I had like 50-ish points left. So I'm like, oh, throwing a bolt thrower.
All right, so just as a quick spoiler before you go to all the other games, bolt thrower, would you do it again?
We'll talk about it later more.
All
but
right.
It won me some games and it lost me some other games.
A lot of players
So
are wondering if they should put bolt throwers on their list. So.
the answer is maybe, sort of, kind of, if you believe in
There you
yourself.
go. You are just as confused. as you were.
And of course, the question that's currently burning up the internet. Damrod, would you do it again?
Yeah.
Oh, what a loser. So by the way,
I will be a loser for the rest of my life.
there you go. For folks who are watching at home, you'll notice that we all have our phones out and we're like frequently looking down at our phones. This is not because we're bored.
We are.
Well, okay. This is not because I'm bored. This is in fact because I am old and cannot remember all of the details of the various 16 games that I played over the last 4 days that have kind of blurred into one. One of the features of Ardacon is it uses the tourney system, so it actually records all the details of the games that you played. So it records who you played against, what lists that they played, what your scores were. So this is a handy reference tool that we're using to figure out, which games we played. My first game was against a Snorri Nirgard from Norway, who was playing Assault on Lothlorien, post FAQ nerf, who had basically the Assault on Lothlorien list with half orcs, half goblins, and he had Drozag, Ashrak, and Musgra, of course, leading the army, and then an orc captain. I think an orc captain on foot. And his army was drawn up with a orc battle line in the center and 2 flanks, each of which had some spiders and bats, and that were kind of lined up behind some goblin archers and some prowlers. With his wings waiting me to run at his run into the middle of his orcs where he could shoot at me from either side. Not surprisingly, I decided not to do that and instead decided to run at one of the wings, in this case, the left one, and was able to get into a position to basically turn the line and hit one of the flanks, turn right, and then hit the orcs that were trying to run over from the other side of the board to help out. And fortunately, I had a couple of those Gilead Druids kind of lined up in a nice channel it was just big enough for the Emperor and a few filed pikes. So while Rutabi was kind of running around killing the creepy crawlies in the backfield, I was able to basically send the Emperor and the pikes into the army, and I did break him. I think it was 10 over. But a nice game against Snorri. Snorri is I believe a new player, and did I think quite well for somebody who was just kind of learning how to use that particular army. That's not an army for beginners, as we mentioned on the podcast.
Wow. Alistair, what scenario did we play in the second round?
We played Domination.
And did you play against?
I played against Fedor Khan from Hungary. This was kind of a weird matchup / scenario because he had 2 great beasts, the Witch King, and a few scattered guys, not too many. I think he had something along the lines of 35 models in the list, maybe a little bit less than that. But it's deceiving because they really only feel like you have 15 because 22 of them are all on make up the Great Beast and the Riders on it. So it was really strange. It was a little bit stressful because obviously if a Great Beast is over top of an objective, not only can I not move it off of the objective, but there are 11 models that are on said objective. So I tried to...
That's actually interesting. I'm going to talk about that.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's very true.
Yeah. All right, so
That actually
was with the objective tokens that I had that I got to place, I was trying to place them on buildings, but on both sides because obviously I didn't know where I was going to be. And then I deployed pretty scattered, but close enough to where, at least with my heroes, Bard and Gandalf, I could get them together if I needed to. I had cast a Compel on his War Beast first turn that, if had successfully gone up, would have just mowed through half of the ground army. I did roll it on a 5 or a 6. I think he rolled a 4 and spent both my points to be able to resist that. And then he wanted to heroic combat. He wanted to compel a model heroic combat into Gandalf with the Witch King on Felbeast, and then tried to kill Gandalf, but was a little bit off on the measurement. So that was a little bit of a contentious moment. And then as he got the Witch King closer, I had one combat where Gandalf was in on the Witch King with a bunch of random guys. Somehow the random guys were able, and Gandalf killed the Felbeast and either nearly put a wound on the Witch King or put a wound on the Witch King that he traded away. But for the most part, a lot of my army was pinned there because Gandalf was not only trying to stop the one Great Beast, but also contain the Witch King as long as possible, while he had a few Orc trackers that were running around the board, getting the objectives. It was really weird because while I could contain one Great Beast, the other one was just there. So if I tried to rush through the center, he was just going to mow me down. For my main priority was to kill the Witch King early on. It took a very long time to do that, despite him having some bad luck with winning fights. And then after that, I played extraordinarily quickly with the rounds and with the phases to be able to just get the victory points I needed to win right at the end. It was a really contentious victory. Again, when you play an opponent quickly, you kind of you fluster them pretty easily, and so then it's easy to get a lot of errors to occur. So that was a very tight game. I won that game 3 victory points to 2.
So my second game was a complete tabling with my opponent. There wasn't a lot interesting to say about it. I moved forward and destroyed the army. It literally collapsed almost exactly that way. So the only funny moment I'll give you with that, before I even kind of moved on, it was a German player who was playing Assault and Lothlorien, which, by the way, interesting side note of Assault and Lothlorien, when they fire at you, I'm Goblin Town, so I have goblins too, so I don't care really about their nighttime stuff. So I was like, oh, that's fun and interesting detail. But basically, the only thing that I thought was kind of humorous in the match was as I was continuously crushing one left flank with the Goblin King, he had left Ashrak out for just kind of open. And I had one oath, as we mentioned, we're going to talk about these oaths. I had one that I needed to kill something with the Goblin King. So I'm like, all right, he just left him there by himself. I could barge and kick this goblin out the way and go get Ashrak. He was 2 inches away. And I'm like, it looks like a trap. Maybe he wants me to overextend the Goblin King. I don't know. So I'm not gonna do it. Next turn goes by, he gets priority, charges Dash Rack into the Goblin King. And I'm like, all right. So I call her a combat with Gollum piling people. I'm like, I guess maybe it's all he has left. He had like Ashrak and a couple goblins just trying to stall me. And so I'm like, okay, and that's it. And then he's like, oh, you're paralyzed. And I'm like, fuck. I completely forgot that he paralyzed.
This is a family podcast.
I'm like, sorry out there. Yes. The equivalent of you stubbing your toe with a Lego is feeling or stepping on a Lego is what I was just like, oh yeah. I completely forgot he does that. Luckily, everything was going so well my way that it didn't matter and that I had to get my leader up, but that was the highlight of that match, is what I'd say. But I ended up winning that, of course. So.
All right. So I guess moving on to my round 2, I was actually on table 1 because I had done pretty well in the first game. So I played against a guy I actually played against in the Masters as well, which was Victor Anderson from Sweden. So he had the first of the Dragon Emperor Legendary Legions that I played against. I say first because there were many of them.
You're gonna hear this story a lot.
Yes. So he had Emperor, I believe it was Brorgir and a captain. So he really went heavy in the numbers on this one. He had like 40 models, like 8 archers in there too. It was a lot of archers. And so we deployed the objectives. He made a very interesting decision where he put 3 objectives on one side and 1 objective on the other. I won the roll off for table side. I'm like, okay, deployed right on the 3 objectives. So I was starting off at an advantage. So he had to march forward at me while I sat back with the bolt thrower on one side and my army in the middle.
Did you do the thing where you like switch and start on the non-typical side, or did you just put?
No, he just put all 3 on one side.
It's good to have goals, I guess.
Yeah.
Our goals are all over there.
I was like, okay, put my army down there. He went really far right to try and get my side objective with his drum and a march on the first turn. But unfortunately for him, the fight did not end up going well. While the bolt thrower didn't really do anything, the warriors of Gondor were able to basically chop through the Easterlings with Boromir being basically untouchable. There was not much he could do to him at all. Despite trying to tremor him with Brorgir a couple times, it just didn't work out. So in the end, I was able to beat through his army, and I got through, pushed through to the center objective, got some guys on there to deny him some points because he had more guys on there. And then I had the left objective, I had the middle objective, and I had the right objective. And then, of course, sadly for him, his guy in the back failed his courage test with like courage 5 or something like that. Just ran away completely, which he wasn't overly happy about. But yeah, I wouldn't say there were any like particularly interesting moments in the game. It was just sort of me sort of beating through his army. So I ended up getting a 7-0 no.
So my second game was against Tommaso again from Italy, and he had the Vanquishers of the Necromancer this time, which is one who brought the race last time. So this was a more fun game. We were playing domination, so I went in with an advantage table wise, but unfortunately no real good way to actually deal with the champions of the Vanquishers of the Necromancer. My theory, which probably in retrospect was a mistake, was going to basically take about half my army and divvy it up and sit on all the objectives, or at least all but the one that the champions were starting on, and then take all my heroes and then the rest of the army and basically throw them at the champions on the theory that
The Vanquishers.
Oh, I'm sorry, the Vanquishers, yeah, not the champions. The Vanquishers on the theory that by the time they kind of cut through all of them, the game would be over and I'd be sitting on all the other objectives. Unfortunately, 2 things happened when I went in. One was a mistake, and I put in the Emperor after some initial ones where he was basically using resources to cast out of combat to immobilize my heroes. I put the Emperor into both Elrond and Galadriel, not really processing the free heroic strike that Elrond was going to get. The theory being I was going to deny him a heroic combat to chop through more of my supporting guys. I think it would have been better off forcing him to spend the might to chop through my guys and just gone after Galadriel. He didn't end up killing the necromancer. He didn't end up killing the Emperor yet, but he did win the fight and do some wounds, and then things happened. It was kind of a slope downhill. The other thing that happened is Rutabi went in, I think, on one of the wizards. I think it was Gandalf, and I had also not processed that they had 3 attacks each, attacks equal to the number of wounds. I was still thinking they had 2 attacks. Gandalf managed to strike up, outstrike Rutabi, win the fight despite all the pike supports, and because I think Gandalf was surrounded at that point by a whole bunch of pikemen and Rutabi. Win the fight and then do 2 wounds to Rutabi that she failed to save on fate. So she ended up with like 1 wound left. I think next turn Galadriel just banished her. And that put me down kind of a big hero that I didn't want to lose early on, and the fight kind of went downhill from there. Emperor followed shortly afterwards, and then Tommaso was running around chasing. We were playing cat and mouse, me just kind of trying to tie him up, and him trying to get to objectives and kill people off of objectives. Borgir had fortunately survived the catastrophe that was the fight, and so his fury was still up. He was kind of running back and forth to objectives, making sure that people didn't run once I broke. But when we timed out, I was still in the lead, but he managed through some spell supports to get a Galadriel, an unarmed Galadriel, because she had already used her one-time channel banishment to sneak within 3 inches of the central objective. So I had the majority there, but not.
So you're talking about the channel banishment where she produces herself.
Yeah, and it auto kills somebody.
Yeah, it auto kills.
Yeah, she used
goes
it
back to.
Yeah, she goes back to unarmed. Yeah, she used it to like auto kill my last person sitting on like objective number 4.
Okay.
And then she ran through a gap that was caused by Tommaso using spells from the wizards to open up a hole in my screen that was screening it off, and get within 3 inches of the center objective. So I ended up having 3 objectives, but one of them was contested. Tommaso ended up with 2, but he broke and killed my leader, so it was a 6-5 loss with no oath. But it was an interesting tactical game. That was actually a much more fun game, certainly than the one against the race. There was a lot of chess matches going on there and a lot of fights going on. So that was my round 2.
All right, Alistair, what scenario was round 3 and what one highlight would you talk about today?
Yeah, round 3 was retrieval, and I played against Bits of Dumbledore, but he didn't play any of the Hunter orcs, surprisingly. He only played the Gundabad orcs. It was an interesting game. I kind of positioned myself in such a way I wanted to get 1 solid turn of shooting in before trying to move forward with superior numbers. He had 32 models to my 48. So I figured I would be able to kind of move up and start wrapping around and then generally push my way towards to his retrieval. In hindsight, it may have been better to I've in the past castled around my objective with survivors, and if they can like cut through the army fast enough, which dies very easily, they can like grab the objective pretty easily. So I was a little bit worried about that, but I figured that because we tied in fight value, I would be able to hold on. The game started out pretty well. I was able to have my turn of shooting, which didn't really do anything, but I had, as soon as our lines clashed, I was able to throw a survivor, a militiaman, into Azog and an orc, and I sorceress blasted the orc. I rolled a 6 for that. He rolled a 5 for resistance, which then sent Azog flying off his ward. I killed the orc, and I rolled 2 wounds on Azog, which he just ate. So very early into the game, I was sitting on a lead because of that, which I wasn't even necessarily thinking about because I was thinking about trying to get the objective. But from that moment forward, he really tore through my army. So despite the fact that I have 48 models in the list, of course I'll talk about it more, I broke 5 out of my 6 games. Which for the army isn't really that problematic from the perspective of staying because it stays quite well, but it creates a problem where I'm bleeding victory points. So after I wounded Azog, he was very keen on playing fast. I could understand that. He played as quickly as he could. I was a little bit more methodical because I felt like I was playing from behind in the sense that I could see he was very quickly breaking me. Eventually, he broke me, and at that point, I kind of figured that the game was just going to go south from there. We were nearing the end of the game at this point, and I think I needed to kill something along the lines of 5, close to like the last turn. I needed to kill 5 models to be able to break him. And in the end, I threw Bard into one of the girls ran, which took away my free hero combat, which was really unfortunate. I threw Bard into 2 orcs. So I had 4 dice. I didn't get the 6. Of course, they got the 6. So I didn't get those 2 kills, which I needed 5. So realistically, high probability I killed them both. In the end, I killed just enough from the other guys to where had I killed both of those models, I would have broken him. We could have continued, but the game ended there. It's possible had we had another turn that I would have actually been able to break him without and keep him from getting my objective, which somehow would have won me the game. It was a pretty contentious game. We were going back and forth because obviously Bard has free heroic combats, but so does Azog. So it was a really interesting back and forth of kind of just trying to dance around to negate one another. Obviously, Azog can act more forcefully in combats than Bard can, so I was really trying to debate how to go about it. A lot of the boards at Ardacon are set up to where there's really a lot of castle opportunities in the center, which I was really wary of because Lake Town does not play well into a castle at all. It is very much the charge up and surround type of an army. And with all of the terrain there, it was really difficult to do that. I don't know how you guys ended up having, Devin, you had a horde, so I'd be interested to know what that was. But in the end, I lost 2-1. No. I lost 3-1. Had I broken him, I would have won 2-1. So that was a bit of a shame, but it was a great game. My opponent's name was Joseph Marandon, who was actually a lovely opponent. We had a lovely game, even though he was playing fast. It wasn't in a like negative play experience type of way. And I did get my oath that turn. I didn't get it in the last game, but I got my oath in that game, which was to kill the most expensive hero outside of the general, which was the Keeper of the Dungeon, which I was able to do.
So my third game was my first loss. The loss against a Swedish player who was playing the Last Alliance, and we were playing retrieval. So for those of you who don't know, it's capture the flag essentially. Going across the board, he decided to stay on his side because against Goblin Town, it's suicide, practically do anything else. But the reason I ended up losing this one is he actually managed to, what was it? He put a wound on the Goblin King. So that's the highlight of the match. And that's where I learned, for all you Goblin Town players out there, keep Grinna always within 3 inches of the Goblin King at all times. He sent Isildur through my lines because, of course, I forgot that he has the ring and can phase through everything. So he sent Isildur through my lines after I'd already moved, got behind the Goblin King. I'm like, and he stabbed me a lot. So I saved 8 out of 9 blubbery mass saves, which is actually pretty insane.
That's some good blubber right there.
Yeah, that's got
good quality blubber.
You want to go into combat and resist some stuff, get fat. So he saved pretty much everything. So I got 1 wound. And so that's why I was like, well, I just put myself in the back foot here because he's already castling around this objective. And then I used Grinna for the rest of the game to constantly call swap with me. So that was the first time I realized how really egregious that rule is, and the fact that you can use it both defensively, of course, and offensively, and you can swap Grinna multiple times in turn to move him around. It absolutely fun rule. 100% use Grinna in all of your games, but then again, if you're playing Goblin Town, you wouldn't ever leave home without him. But that was the highlight of that. I did lose 1-0, unfortunately, and
But that was the only victory point scored.
Yeah, you just stabbed me. So yeah, it was a tie. It was supposed to be a tie.
Yeah, wow.
It was like I threw away the game. So, but it's not too reflective of what really the game was going to look like, because if it had kept going, he was going to break me. The terror bubble was really hard to get through. I'm not experienced enough of Goblin Town to know how to, like, you have to create these almost like U shapes, so that way everyone gets a chance to charge through, because if you don't, then people block each other from charging. I also should have focused on surrounding a lot more with Goblin Town. Instead, I was just so focused on hitting lines when I'm like, nope, skip the guys, just keep going toward the objective and constantly apply that pressure. And I didn't do that. So a lot of mistakes I made. He absolutely outplayed me. Wonderful match, and he taught me a lot about Goblin Town because he plays Goblin Town. So he was like, "Oh yeah, you should do." He was helping me, like in the middle of the match. He's like, "By the way, while I kick your butt, I'm gonna go ahead and show you how to play your army." But yeah, so I mean, but that was the highlights of my third game.
Yeah. All right. So on to my third game. I was playing against Neil McLaughlin, who was an absolutely lovely opponent. We've met each other before. He was actually in the Masters last year. Did pretty well, I think. He came fourth. And he had Serpent Horde. I think it was Pure Serpent. So he had Suladan, Raza, and the Betrayer. So going into the match, I was very concerned about this matchup, especially because I would have to run at him and he would get some shooting off. And he also had, I believe it was 42 models, which was a decent amount more than me. And he also had 6 cav, whereas I only had 2 more. So I ended up, it actually started off very well for me. I called a March first turn, pushed my army forward. He got some shooting off, only killed 2 guys. So I was like, okay, perfect. This should be good. Went into combat. He won the move off and was able to actually compel Madrill out and kill him. He needed to spend a might point with Suladan to call a strike, but he was able to kill Madrill. So that was a little unfortunate, but I really had banked a lot on winning the heroic move off that turn, because that was going to be really important for me to win, but I did not. And unfortunately, from there, the game quickly went downhill, as despite me getting most of what I wanted, other than Madrill dying, his battle line simply destroyed mine in a 1v1 fight. On average, I wound him a little bit more, I think, and I win more fights, but unfortunately, the dice gods were not with me in the beginning, which unfortunately was not the right time for the dice gods to abandon me. He got a lot of kills early on, and actually broke me fairly quickly. Boromir had to get off his horse to get in and went in and fought some guys. Boromir actually killed like 6, 7, 8 guys, something like that. So he was doing a lot of work, but unfortunately the rest of the army wasn't. The bolt thrower, I had 2 to 3 turns where it really had a chance to do a lot of work. Obviously, it wounds him on 3s, so I can get a lot of quick kills with it, but unfortunately, I rolled 1s each time when I rolled for the number of shots and missed with all of those shots, so I got basically no kills with it. And towards the end of the game, the dice started evening out, as they always do, because that's how dice work. I started winning more combats, killing more guys, but unfortunately, despite getting a wound on Suladan with a random guy due to a roll-off, I was 3 off breaking him in the end, and he had broken me. So it ended up being a 3-1 to him. I was so close, but unfortunately, I was not able to take it. So I lost that one, did not get my oath. He got his, I believe, but it was an absolutely fun game, and he was a lovely guy to play against.
So my game 3 was against a lovely gentleman named Rhys Lewis from Wales in the United Kingdom, and he was running a list entitled "Looks Like Meat's Back on the Menu, Boys," which, as you would suspect, was a full Ugluk Scouts Legion with Ugluk, Mahur, Grishnak, Snaga, and somewhere like 50 Urukai and Orcs with them. And since we were playing retrieval, and these guys move really, really fast, I figured I had my work cut out for me on this one. Fortunately, this was a board with one of the few boards at Ardacon, I think, that had really a lot of terrain. It had 4 of the tents in the middle, creating a bunch of kind of castle opportunities, and then a significant patch of rough ground to one side that kind of shut down a board or made it hard to move around that board. And then, a couple woods. So he plugged up the gaps with orcs in the middle, the gaps between the tents. Took most of his Urukai with Maher and Ugluk and ran them around his right, my left flank to spin. So retrieval, if you don't recall, this is the one where it has the board kind of cut diagonally like a sandwich, and took them around the flank to get at my objective. And I went and kind of plugged holes in the center, realizing there wasn't going to be much chance I was going to have to get to the objective. Although I did kind of feint in that direction with my cavalry, they eventually kind of came back and ended up doing other things. But basically plugged up gaps in the center and started killing orcs, and took Rutabi, and then as I killed sufficient numbers of orcs in one of the gaps, would then kind of shift reserves to the other gap and take the reserves from there and kind of send them back until I formed kind of a small task force that was kind of sitting around the objective, waiting for Ugluk and Maher to get there. And what really helped out was this was one of these games where Perkier was just on fire. And every time it was my turn, Borgir would like blow another hole in the lines of Urukai. I think she ended up taking out maybe 12 or 13 Urukai and orcs. And she just kind of made a circuit of each one of these gaps between the tents and just like, kind of thinned the ranks, went to the next one, thinned the ranks, and then was able to move back to the objective. And I think she killed there was like a first line of Urukai that were running up on the objective, and my poor hapless guys that were back there defending it. And Borgir was able to come up and just kind of shoot down that line and kill like 3 out of 4 of them. And Rutabi ended up being in the backfield and managed to kill Maher, who was my oath target. And then Ugluk ran up after the army was broken to make one last gasp attempt to get at my objective, and basically got surrounded by probably about 8 pikemen. Failed to roll up, was out of might at that point, and just kind of went down under a bunch of stabbing pikes. And I was able to, what was I able to do? Yeah, I was able to take away a 5-0 victory for that because I broke his army, killed him. Neither of us were able to get the other side's objective, but it was a win, and every win is when you walk away from that. So, but thanks, Reese. It was a great game. I know you're a podcast listener, and I hope I didn't sell you short in this. It was a wonderful game to play. It was good flanking movement, but fortunately I was able to get back with just enough, just in time.
Game 4 was Command the Battlefield, which is trying to control the 4 quadrants with a 12-inch dead zone in the center. I played against Dirk Helmus from the Netherlands. He was on the Rotterdam White Scars Team 1. This was an interesting list. This was the first of 2 Serpent Horde Mahud or Farharad armies that I would face this weekend. He had Soladan, a Mahu King, and then the Betrayer, with a bunch of guys with bow, a bunch of Serpent Guard, I think 2 half trolls, a couple of camels, and then just a bunch of guys. I think overall he had 32 models, which was definitely tighter than my 18. But again, I think to some extent, having learned my lesson from the game I played against Rangers of Athelion, them just being outfought in potentially tight areas is really not a great thing to have, especially considering how easily they die. So like theoretically, statistically, if you have 2 dice to try to kill something that you need a 5 for, you have a 54% chance of being able to do so, 54, 55% chance. So it is actually statistically probable. And then with the Suladan or the Serpent Horde list with Farharad, the poison reroll obviously doubles that probability. No, well, it doesn't double that probability, but it makes it exponentially higher because you get to reroll the failed wounds. So I was pretty conscious of this. He had to deploy first, which was good, but Suladan and the Betrayer were able to come on the same board edge. He had a defensive kind of positioning where he almost had a channel with bows and Serpent Guard on either side of it, and then the heroes at the tip, but like kind of concealed by both Cav and the models. His Mahu King did not come on. I rolled Hilda's first, and I deployed her. This was on the eastern side. I deployed her on the northern side, right in the middle, because I figured I didn't want to have the same issue that I had in the domination game, where realistically I'm fighting, and then all of a sudden the game's about to end, and I am not really well positioned to get objectives because the army's not very fast. So I had deployed her. I put her in some woods because I figured at some point in time the camels were going to come and try to chase her down, her and her warband down. I figured if I stayed in the woods, they would at least not get their extra dice or knockdown for charging me. So I was there, and then I deployed. I got a 6 for Bard, and effectively what I wanted to do with Bard and Gandalf's warbands is effectively take his defensive maneuver and squash it on both sides, because at that point it would give me an opportunity to get more traps, and if I get the traps that I need, I'm able to play a more effective Lake Town game. Effectively, Lake Town really wants to surround their opponent. So Bard's exactly where I want him positioned. And then Gandalf rolls a 2. So at this point, I was kind of in a pickle. I didn't really want, or he rolls a 3. I was kind of in a pickle in that I didn't, oh no, he did roll 2. I do obviously want to spend all 3 my points to be able to deploy on the eastern border, but I didn't want him to be able to position me. I didn't necessarily want to mite down and not have Gandalf on the board. So I ended up miting it up 2 times to deploy on the northern face and then try to come in. As I came in, though, I was able to move 10 inches up with Gandalf and throw a Sorcerer's Blast at the Betrayer, knocked him off his horse, and then the guys came up. This was really like a tense series of turns, in that effectively 2 of his warbands were now just crushing into Bard's single warband. And Bard's a great hero, and his troop capacity is great, but he can't really survive all of this being outfought, the banner, and then having all of their wounds being rerolled, attacks being rerolled. So Bard's warband was buckling pretty quickly. Bard was killing models here and there, but Gandalf was trying to kind of hurry up back. Eventually, I got Suladan off of his horse as well, which was pretty good. And I finally, after several turns, I think it ended up taking me 3 turns to actually get Gandalf and all of his men in position to start sandwiching. At this point, he had rolled a 2 for the Mahu King. I threw him on the furthest part that I could, so he's slowly coming along. Hilda, at this point, a couple of her men stayed. She's running to join the rest of the guys because he's rapidly killing me. Eventually, though, I'm able to miraculously, because I get the sandwich, break him right before he's about to break me. And at this point, he kills both of the girls, which I don't necessarily care about. At this point, it's late in the game.
You're that guy who doesn't care about girls dying.
I don't
Little
care about. I didn't
girls.
care about the girls dying.
Just totally
Because
care
I
about
outfought his standard warriors. I had already gotten several turns of free hero combat, so I wasn't terribly worried about that. Funny enough, and I'll end it right here, it came down to where, had he quartered on this one turn, I would have lost because I wasn't in position. And somehow, with Courage 3 camels and Courage 2 far half trolls, he passed 4 courage tests with them to keep himself right above quarter. He thought he quartered himself. He's like, oh, I think I've won the game. I'm like, no, you passed those courage tests. So I was able to get into positions to control 2 of the quadrants. The next turn, both half trolls ran away, so he only had 1 quadrant. I broke him. I wounded his general without being wounded, and I had 2 of the quadrants, double his. So I was able to win 6-2-3.
All right, so
And I got my.
all right. Well, fourth game was against a guy named Kevin from the Netherlands, and this game is probably the closest I could say to what feels like an auto win with Goblin Town. So by using the scribe, I can just pop up goblins anywhere that I want. And my opponent, who actually was a way more skilled opponent than me, by far, they was handing me like handily destroying my army. He just felt like, you know what, the only way I have a chance is to break my my army and make all my goblins that I just summoned all over the world run. And it was a good strategy. He actually did break me. He actually was tearing apart my lines. He actually held me in a corner to do so. But unfortunately, he needed like about 7 to 9 things to go right in order for him to have a chance. And he maybe got 5. So he was really tearing me apart, but I ended up taking a courage test for all of my goblins that I did all of the different quadrants. And by a twist of fate and luck, I guess, every single goblin ran except one in every quadrant. so I won the game. So I got a 6-1 victory, but the score is not reflective to how it looked like in the field. I probably had I was hurting him too. He had I think he broke as well, but maybe not. I'm not sure. But yeah, that's I would say if you're gonna fight Goblin Town in that quadrant mission, you're probably just best off trying to break and kill that scribe as fast as possible, which is what he did. He used a bunch of heroic combats to just kill the scribe. He actually is the first time he's actually encountered my scribe. And so when he asked me the stats, because he was in close combat with my scribe, I was like, I honestly don't know. He's probably 3 defense. Just go for it. And then he just murdered him. so all right.
All right. So round 4. I played against Kenny Runchell, who was from Denmark, and he brought the second Dragon Emperor Legendary Legion. This one I think was the most interesting of them. I'll just say that. I would actually say it's a mechanically bad army that he created, and I'm sorry, Kenny, if you're listening. But he took 2 heroes instead of the usual 3 at this points level. He took just the Dragon Emperor Mutabi, and you may be asking how he made up these points. He did it by making his entire army black dragons, which is quite redundant, I would say, because you can already just use your black dragon pipes. You don't need the front rank to be black dragon as well. And he also took a large number of cataphracts, which isn't necessarily a bad thing, but he took a banner. And I am not entirely sure why he took this banner, because the Dragon Emperor comes with a 12-inch banner. So it feels really weird to also take an additional banner.
That is so strange.
Yeah.
It's a just in case banner.
Yes. And luckily for him, he got to use that just in case banner, because he played in a way that I could not really comprehend. In that he took his Dragon Emperor and ran it. There's no other way to describe it. I'm sorry to say.
And by the way, if Evan's opponent here is listening to this, I sincerely apologize for this. But anyway,
Evan's an asshole.
I mean this with complete respect, because he was an incredibly lovely person. Like he was a very, very nice person. We had an incredible game, just in the respect that we were having a lot of fun. But he made a very unfortunate choice in that he chose to move the Dragon Emperor to one side of the battlefield and the entire rest of his army to the other side of the battlefield, which, for those of you who have ever played with or against the Dragon Emperor, is not how you want to play, because the Dragon Emperor has a huge buff radius and you want to use that. Unfortunately for him, he did not. I was able to charge and surround him with Boromir and like 10 other guys or something. Took me a couple turns, but I killed the Dragon Emperor. And then I just sort of had a bunch of decoy guys off to the side with Madril that were sort of skirmishing with the rest of his army. as I killed the Emperor, and then I was able to break him and get 3 of the 4 sides, whilst he only had slightly more on one side. He did get his oath though, which was the master tactician, because I wasn't anywhere near that objective. But in the end, I was able to beat him quite convincingly. And while I was a little harsh with how I described his play, I hope that it was educational for him, in that you want to keep your Dragon Emperor near the rest of your Easterlings.
So the story of my game 4 actually begins before the game. When, just to give a little background, this was the Saturday of Ardacon, and at that point I was suffering from tremendous amounts of jet lag. I think I had something like 2.5 hours of sleep the night before, just because I couldn't fall asleep. And this was going into game 4, in the evening, and at that point there was like no gas in the tank. And I'm going into game 4. I'm like 2-1. I'm like, what I really don't want is, another. Well, not another, but I don't want a contentious game at this point. I want a nice, fun game. And I look down at the pairings, and I see that I am paired with I'm paired with Harry Moore, and I go, great. I'm gonna play with Harry from the Entmoot podcast, and this is gonna be so much fun, because I've always wanted to play with Harry. So I go and I find Harry, and I say, Harry, we get to play together. See, we're paired. It's going to be great. I'm really looking forward to having a nice, relaxed game with you. And he looks at it and goes, yeah, that all sounds fine, except my last name is Parkhill, you twit.
You really say twit?
It all gets better in the storytelling.
Yeah, see, I bully people bully dad.
Yeah, that's right. So at this point, my face just fell, and that's when Harry Parkhill explained that Harry Moore is quite a gentleman, quite a fun guy to play with. So I was feeling a little better at that. I went and I found my table. Harry Moore was running Angmar, and he was actually a wonderful gentleman to play with. Angmar, by the way, Angmar and the Dragon Emperor are actually 2, I think, very well paired armies. They have kind of an individual kind of or unique chess match dance that they do, because one has kind of the irresistible force of Gullivar, and the other has kind of the immovable object of the Emperor and the Phalanx. And it's always interesting to see who's going to win in that. And on top of it, we're playing a Maelstrom from a battle scenario. I end up winning the role that I don't want to win at the beginning, and I come on first. But fortunately, my entire army comes in all in one place and kind of assembles in one corner of the board, and then gets set to kind of disperse to go to the various places that I'm going to go. And Harry gets up, and Harry rolls for deployment. And the first thing he does is he rolls the Witch King's Warband. He rolls a 6, so he has a choice. Do I go someplace else and try and play a maneuver game here, or do I come on in his face? And Harry, brave man that he is, says, I'm going to come on in his face. So he comes on maybe about 7 or so inches away from my big glom of Easterlings, and sets up his Orc Warband with the Witch King behind it. And then proceeds to roll 1s for both Gullivar and the Orc Captain, so that the Witch King and his dozen or so orcs are staring down the entire Easterling army, which proceeds to then beat the drum and basically bear down on the Witch King. So the next turn, as I'm getting set to kind of run into the Witch King's kind of shaky battle line there, the Orc Captain again decides not to come on, probably seeing what happened to the Witch King when he did. And Gullivar rolls with the ability to come on, I think, anywhere that Harry wanted. And Harry had another decision. Do I come on kind of behind the Witch King and reinforce him that way, or do I come on the other side of the Easterlings? Chose to come on the other side of the Easterlings and hurled Gullivar forward. Gullivar got a couple of good hurls off on a heroic combat, but ended up less than 6 inches away from the Emperor on his Palanquin. And unfortunately, I won for Harry. I won the next move off, and the Emperor went into Gullivar, and which started the Dragon Emperor Gullivar dance that lasted for literally the rest of the game, where the Emperor was just banging into him with various helping hands, while unfortunately the rest of Harry's army kind of died around Gullivar. The Witch King kind of ran away, came back in one attempt to try and help Gullivar, but really couldn't make any effect because of the other guys that were surrounding it. I didn't, however, succeed in killing Gullivar. I think he had 2 wounds left at the end of the game, but he was basically tied up for the rest of the game, and the rest of Harry's army died. And I think by the end, let me see what the score was here. Oh, this was an 8-1. So this was an 8-1. I got my oath, and came out of day one with 3 wins and 1 loss.
And by the way, the U.S. team had 8 players.
Yeah, 9. We have 9.
No, 8 players who came out of day one with 3 wins. And
Oh, 8. Yes, 8 players,
Yeah.
3 1. Yep.
So round 5 was Reconnoiter. To be honest, I really optimized my list to face 3 things: Goblin Town, Assault on Lothlorien, and Dragon Emperor. I figured that they would be very popular. Throughout the duration of the tournament, I played 0 of those armies, which is definitely a lesson in never focus so much on specific armies that you do not go for a well-rounded choice.
It's actually really weird because 5 of my 6.
I know you guys were playing.
Yeah, like-
You played 2
I
Dragon
played
Emperors.
2
and-
Assault on Lothlorien, 2 Dragon Emperors.
You played against Assault on Lothlorien, did you?
I played it in
In the Masters.
Yeah.
So, somehow miraculously, what I should have been list building against was Serpent Horde with the Betrayer and and Mahood, because that's exactly, I played a mirror match for round 5. I played against Dewey Evans, who apparently is a pretty good UK player.
He actually
ranked
very good.
12th in their league this past year.
He's actually very, very prominent player. I played against him several Articons.
Okay, so there you go. So
yeah.
he was playing that, and so because he has 2 heroes who have March, he has Cav and such. He also had more models. He had elected not to take the half trolls. He had 38 to my 48. So I really was a little bit. I didn't feel great about this matchup. But nevertheless, Bard came on, so he had to deploy first. Everything came on. Yeah, everything came on in the first turn. I went on, Bard came on, Hilda did not, and Gandalf did not. I kind of moved up. I don't know if I had some Scarlet Archery, but he had no shooting for the first turn. I had no shooting for the first turn. But again, I'm marching through the center, which has 3 tents that are eventually going to lead to a castle. And so whereas before I was given a primed opportunity to sandwich the other army for round 4, here I knew I was going to be hitting it on head on first, and I was also going to be hitting it in a confined castle type of an area. So the second turn, Hilda comes on. Obviously, she's lagging 6 inches behind from Bard. I deployed Bard, kind of shooting for the middle. I deployed Hilda next to Bard on my left side, and then Gandalf rolls another one to not come on. So then I'm moving forward. At this point, I think he moved forward. No, he didn't. He moved half, but he didn't call the poison thing because he moved half. So I'm a little bit disheveled to some extent in my deployment, in that I'm 1 warband's ahead, 1 warband's behind, 1 warband's on the table. He at this point throws 1 cav to the left side, kind of towards where Hilda's warband is, and then on the 3rd turn, I roll a 2 for Gandalf to come on the board, which does not have him come on because you need to have a 3+ after round 1. On round 4, it is an auto come on, but I really didn't think that I had time to wait another round, so I used my point to might it up. Gandalf comes on, tries to Sorcerer's Blast. The Raider is unable to do so, so he kind of tries to skew to the side a little bit to avoid getting shot at, which to some extent may have been problematic. It would have been a whole lot easier if I could have left Gandalf up there, but I didn't want to get him to be dismounted because I needed him to join the rest of the army. So I have a bunch of models on my left side. I'm kind of moving forward into this unfortunate situation here. He charges with Suladan and 2 of the camels. In the end, though, because he killed the models with the camels that were there, it was just a camel, and it was the Mahout King just sitting there because there was nowhere else for them to go. They had extended their full. So I positioned Bard to shoot straight into the Mahout King. 3 archers. In the end, they did nothing, but I was able to pin the raider. I killed the raider. I had, in the meantime, some sorcerer's blast. So in the end, very quickly, I had killed all of his cavalry, which is great from the mobility perspective. I actually was moving along the board much quicker than he was, but again, I was getting to a point where I was going to break, and I knew that I was going to start bleeding points, and because I was not one solid contingent, I was going to be taking some courage tests. In the end, I think I lost a pretty critical heroic move. I lost 2 heroic moves back to back, which is unfortunate, but of course it happens. And he was able to pin Bard and threw everything he had into Bard, but somehow miraculously only wounded Bard 4 times. Like, great, I have 3 fate. I failed 2 of them, so that obviously isn't enough to be able to survive. So Bard dies. At this point, I have some models moved up. In the end, I was able to get a model off the board. He was able to get 0, but he had broken me and he had killed my general. I did not get my oath, which was to kill the betrayer. I figured I was going to have to do it at some point. The betrayer was on 2 will, though, which is kind of frustrating because I could have tried to throw guys into him to pop him, but it didn't work out. So in the end, I scored 3 victory points to his 5 victory points.
All right. So once again, so this 5th round is where I finally put it together. Brenna for my 3rd match, realizing I should keep him close. And then the 4th match, I didn't say it, but the guy who played the Dragon Emperor, and the reason I got my butt kicked is because the Paladin gives this banner across the entire army. So I faded the Dragon Emperor again in Recon, and I'm like, all right, not repeating the same mistakes. Finally figured it out. I ended up having this moment where I was very proud of myself. And I'm going to give you this highlight moment. Not a full bat rep, of course, but went against a UK player, I believe, had Dragon Emperor. I ended up calling a heroic move when I had the Goblin King behind a building, and the building was blocking line of sight of the Goblin King to the Dragon Emperor. So he had priority. I called a heroic move. He looked at it. He's like, Goblin King can't see the Dragon Emperor, right? And I'm like, yeah, no, you can't see it. And he's like, okay, go ahead and take it. And so he didn't really understand why. Goblin puts on the ring, jumps on behind. All the Goblin Town goblins, grab all the supports, anything possible. Throw Grinna onto the Dragon Emperor, and the Goblin King just walks around the building and says hello to the Grinna, and did a swap with me, and he was like, oh. And it was great. I was like, yes, I finally used this thing. Tore the damn Palanquin apart. I'm like, yep, not losing this game. And proceeded to table this army. And it was a really fun match. It was actually really, really cool. It was also kind of an uphill battle with Goblin Town, but for my opponent. But I actually got no models off. I won 5-0, killing my opponent far too fast. I was 7 inches away from the board edge with a whole horde of goblins, and I couldn't get them off because I quartered my opponent. So I ended up reducing them down to like 3 models, and my Goblin Town is just everywhere. So that is now Goblin Town Unleashed. Devin finally learned how to play it. So.
All right, so round 5, I was up against not my first, not my second, but my 3rd Dragon Emperor Legendary Legion. And this was the 3rd different variation I played against.
And by the way, none of us, we didn't even play the same Dragon Emperors.
No.
Different opponents.
They were
all
different opponents. There
were everywhere.
There were many.
The Easterling Empire is in serious contention.
Indeed, yeah.
It has a surfeit of emperors.
Yeah.
Yes, and this person was playing slightly less models in this army, but it was Emperor, Utabi, and Borgir. I had a pretty big shot at the beginning to get a model off and get 3 points, and then his 2 archers decided that no, my knight was not going off the board, They had one chance to shoot at it. They took that chance and just killed the knight. So that made the game much more challenging for me at that point. He sent some knights and Borgir off to one side, and then the rest of his army off towards the main part of my army on the other side. And the bolt thrower, which had done absolutely nothing, Dad, you're blocking me. The bolt thrower, which had done absolutely nothing.
For those of
the
you watching
entire
on
time.
YouTube, you gotta get Evan's good side.
Yeah. Well, generally, you've got to get my side in the first place, which you did not have with his arms.
I'm still
like that.
here.
Yes. You can lean forward, you just can't do this. So, my bolt thrower decided that now was the time to actually function as a model that exists. And it shot, killed 2 horses and a guy out of the 3 cataphracts. So one of the cataphracts died and the other 2 were dismounted, and my opponent was very, very disappointed because that was supposed to be his flanking force that was going to run off the board. Borgir cast a couple of tremors that didn't really do overly much, killed a couple guys maybe. But then the battle lines engaged, and the problem that the previous Dragon Emperor legions had against me, that this one still had, persisted, which was Boromir. Once Borgir was not trying to tremor him and get him off his horse, there was basically nothing that they could do to Boromir at all because he's higher fight and he just rips through the Easterlings very quickly. I ended up breaking him, and because he had been able to win a lot of priorities and call a lot of heroic moves with Borgir, he was able to stop me from getting any models off the board, but I was able to quarter him before he broke me. So I ended up winning that one 3-0, and no oath with that.
Okay, so my round 5 was again against Neil McLaughlin, who Evan had faced earlier. So Neil was on his second Iverson of the tournament, and we're since this was Reconnoiter, and Neil, if you'll recall, had a Serpent Horde army with about 20 poison bows and the Betrayer. I was not looking forward to this matchup because I figured this was going to be a World War I-esque dash across no man's land into these poison bows. So I decided I was just going to do this as best I could. Basically, fortunately, I was lucky enough. My whole army came on turn 1, set up, and basically put it all on the left flank, where I had a straight shot straight across the board, and said, I'm really not going to be able to do much if he wants to run stuff off. I'm going to take my army and go the other way and see if he'll oppose me. Fortunately, he accepted that invitation and he opposed me. He marched on the board, set up his gun line. By the time he got it set up, though, because the Emperor's warband moved so quick, I was getting into combat very quickly. He didn't roll particularly well, so that by the time the lines closed, I think Borgir had killed like 7 or 8 Haradrim with tremors, and Neil had only killed, I think, 1 guy from bowfire, which was not really the exchange he wanted. Because the defense 4 Haradrim did not do well when a defense 6 pike phalanx, fight 5 pike phalanx hit it in the face. Neil did have a moment. I was basically Rutabi was taking point, kind of cutting her way through stuff as she does. She cuts her way through a couple of Haradrim and sees Suladan sitting on his horse on the other side, snarling and twirling his mustaches. Suladan wins the heroic move off and gets the charge into Rutabi the next turn. The Betrayer throws, I think, 3 will into Rutabi, and as Rutabi did kind of throughout the tournament, Rutabi failed her resist test, so Rutabi was immobilized. Neil calls the strike, gets it high enough and manages to one-shot kill Rutabi, and is sitting there jumping up and down with glee on top of Rutabi's corpse, and looks up and sees that, lo and behold, behind Rutabi was standing this enormous palanquin that Suladan had not seen before, which then wins the heroic move roll off the next turn, slams into Suladan, while a bunch of pikemen kind of run around behind Suladan and just kind of grabs Suladan by the throat, picks him up, and proceeds to beat his horse to death with Suladan. So that was the end of Suladan, and Neil's army started to disintegrate pretty quickly. I noticed as I was kind of heading toward the board edge that I moved in and kind of contacted a bunch of his guys as I was infiltrating folks toward the board edge, because this fight happened very close to the board edge. He was starting to stab, and it's like, why are you stabbing? Oh, this ends at quarter, doesn't it? Everybody shield. So it turned into one of these bizarro world games at the end where I'm trying not to kill him and he's trying to kill himself, because he'd gotten a few cavalry models off the board. I gotten, I think, one cavalry model off the board at that point. I managed to preserve it. I think he killed like one less model than he needed to kill of himself to get off. And I managed to get my other two cavalry models off. I flubbed on the last turn. I could have actually gotten a few of my foot models off to given me an extra few victory points if I remembered to sound the drum on the last turn, and I did not do it. But in the end,
Not a thing you think about.
no, it's not a thing you think about at the end game, but I should have thought about it this time. But we ended up each getting three of our cavalry off, and I, killed Suladan and broke his army. So I came out of that with a 5-0 and avenged my son.
Indeed.
All right, so the last scenario was Assassination, which was actually is a fantastic scenario for survivors because Gandalf is a phenomenal assassin to have. It's also really easy. Like, oftentimes you can play around containing the girls, and in this case, because Hilda's so cheap, I could just, for the most part, ignore keeping her in combat. I started out the game. I was playing against Rob Crumbs, who was part of the podcast, right?
I didn't realize you played him.
I played Rob Cron for the last round.
I didn't realize Rob Crime was part of the podcast.
I thought he was right there.
He was playing Boromir with a heap of Fountain Guard, Madril, and then Huron. He then had, I think, something along the lines of 8 Rangers. He deployed in the middle because it's a 24-inch deployment, really with the intention of castling, and I've learned my lesson from this. So I deployed way back. It's like, you're coming to me. I did the math in my head. He might have 9 shots. I have 12. Bard has his rapid fire, so I have a maximum of 14. I'm going to cast Blinding Light, and I'm just going to sit here, and I'm going to shoot him. And even if it's a boring game, he's coming to me one way or another. I will not march down the middle of another board and get castled and broken for no good reason. So the first turn of shooting, I think he killed one guy. I somehow shot through his Fountain Guard shield wall that was, spanning the center of the board. Again, castled between some of the tents. I killed 3 Rangers the first turn. He and I played kind of a dance back and forth between shooting. It really was one side. I think he maybe killed one more. I don't even know if he did that. I had killed 7 with shooting. I think I'd killed 4 or 5 Rangers. 5 Rangers, and then I had mited one of Bard's shots to kill a Fountain Guard, and I maybe killed one more. So about 7 models before he started realizing, oh shoot, I need to come. He kept his heroes behind buildings because he didn't want me to Sorcerer's Blast them or shoot them, which was to some extent smart, but also they were blocked, so they really couldn't see anything to charge. Huron was my objective, not only for the scenario, my assassin target. I figured he would hide Madril pretty well, but also for my oath, which was to kill the most expensive model outside of the hero, which evidently throughout the span of this tournament, because I think I used it every time, is about 90 points. That's the most expensive secondary hero people can afford. So he coming at me, he came down the center, there was a tent, and then to the side, and at this point I was within charge range for just about everything, so I'm like, perfect, I'm gonna start rapping, and I did. So I threw Hilda into combat. I wasn't really thinking, could Hilda be his assassin target, because I really wanted the +1 to wound. I'm like, this is great. I'm going to surround this thing, which I did, surrounded it entirely, and I'm just going to start killing it. Boromir comes around, can't charge anything because he couldn't see anything, but he can get close. Bard's in combat. I have just about everything in surround. He brings his knights up. I had called a heroic move actually. So he brings his knights up. I then surround the knights. And then I'm like, great, here we go. Between shielding and the banner, maybe I killed one Fountain Guard over where Hilda was. And Bard didn't kill anything in his combat, even though he won on the knockdown, couldn't kill. I think maybe I killed one more model, but maybe so like one model. Somehow miraculously, I threw 3 guys into each of the knights, trapping one and with 3, and then putting 2 into the other. Killed both knights miraculously, and then at this point, I think he realized I can't really hide Huron. I going into the game, I was really aggressive about trying to kill Madril because I figured that otherwise he might just hide Huron, figuring he's my assassin target. So I was like Sorcerer's Blasting Madril. I was like shooting in the way to kill Madril. So Madril was hiding, coming around the other flank. And then Huron comes in and really like I broke him. And then he was like, so you're like 5 away from breaking. And I was like, no, I'm actually 12, which at this point was the best that I had done in terms of not breaking. We keep playing. I break him. I'm like, shoot, this might end next turn and I'm not going to get a very good victory. It doesn't end. We continue on. I think he breaks me. It doesn't end again. He's now comfortable enough to put Huron in combat in such a way that Bard and Gandalf can get him. Bard and Gandalf get him. Gandalf gets his kill. And then at this point, I'm just dancing around. I'm figuring that so long as he can never get to Bard or Gandalf or Hilda, who I had pulled, I realized my error, pulled her out immediately. Or the girls, there was no conceivable way for him to win because I would just keep boxing him. And effectively, it was just that. He was trying to deny me general kill, which I didn't care about at all. I was never going to throw Bard into Boromir, and the game ended 8-1. And I got it.
All right. Well, then, for my final game, I actually nearly blew this one. Basically, with Assassination, I just assumed, and I don't know, maybe just throughout the match, I just stopped thinking, but I just figured he wouldn't pick the mercenary captain as his assassination target. So my entire movie army. I was playing into Assault Malfurion. So it was an Italian player, Assault Malfurion, and I moved the whole army up the middle and on the left flank. So to prevent him from escaping, I'm like, all right, I'll deploy the Goblin Mercenaries crew of 6 guys. That's all they got. Into the right, into this like patch of grass or wheat fields, and as soon as I did that, his entire army fired everything into. He sent enraged forbats, fired trained fixes. All his war grinders went that direction. I'm like, oh. I was like, shit, I just handed this guy the game. And
meanwhile, the mercenary is like, swap with me.
Yeah, right. I actually did all kinds of shenanigans to get it. I called a heroic march. The Goblin King rushed over there. He chucked a goblin in there. I'd spent 2 points of might to knock it down. And then Grinna ended up using the heroic march to move 8 inches, did a swap with me in the shoot phase, swap with me in the fight phase, got the guy out of there. And we're just fighting. But at this time, the enraged bats said, and they're already got a wound. We're fighting the entire battle in a wheat field, like this 6x6 inch wheat field thing. And basically everything's gone haywire. The Goblin King's like kicking shit into there to like stop combats from even occurring. And I really was like, oh my God, I lost this game because he already wounded my guy and I hadn't even gotten close to his. And so he had Musgurds, Rosag, Ashrak, works, well not Ashrak, Shaman, but he had an Orc Captain. And that's what I had picked as my target. I got so lucky that it seemed like he also picked that as his assassin. So I guess he wanted to go ahead and go for gold. He sent the Orc Captain around the wheat field, and the Goblin King noticed that. And I wasn't close enough to reach him, but I was close enough to reach another one of his guys. So Goblin's like, all right, put on the ring. We go into that other guy. He notices it and is like, heroic combat. And I was like, yep, all right, heroic combat. Let's go after him. And basically, I won the roll-off. Go in there, smash the hell out of the Goblin or Captain, and my opponent's staring at the board with this blank stare on his face. And he's like, good game. I was like, because he knew, that was my target, and like, because I had sent a lot of resources to go after him, like to try to get this perfectly worked out where I could get to him. So it was like literally second to last turn that happened, but I actually was losing 1-0 the entire game. So yeah, that won't do that again. Like,
Play Luca?
no, it's Giacomo.
Okay.
Yeah. So yeah, what was mine?
Well, after that absolutely thrilling and exciting game Devin had, I camped in the corner. So I played against Pits of Doguldur, which last time I played Pits of Doguldur in the Masters, I got completely destroyed. Just they walked over my entire army. So I'm like, okay, last time I camped in the corner and got destroyed. I better camp in the corner this time, right? Makes complete sense. So I did the exact same thing again, and my opponent didn't roll as well. So it worked. I shot out, I think it was 7 or 8 guys before combat hit. My bolt thrower, which had won me the last game, did a great job of doing absolutely nothing. I think it got 0 kills the entire game. But thankfully, my archers were rolling extremely well, got a ton of kills. And this forest was basically, it wasn't entirely in the corner. There was a little gap off to the side and a little gap going this way as well. So there were a couple ways to get around. And he decided that instead of going around the forest, he was going to go through the forest, which was not a great idea because all 3 of my heroes that he could be assassinating just decided to run 6 inches out around the forest and just ran away. Meanwhile, he was just trotting through the forest very slowly, and I was shooting him to death. Azog tried to go around one way. I sent my heroes out the other way. He heroic combated back over this way. My heroes ran the other way again. So we were just playing a game of cat and mouse, basically. But unfortunately, while that was happening, I was basically destroying his army. Boromir was getting a lot of kills. And my warriors were outfighting him, and I was rolling a decent number of 6s, so I was getting a decent number of kills there. But obviously, it was still Pits of Doguldur, so he was getting a decent number of kills of mine. He was getting very close to breaking. But at the beginning of the game, he had decided to hide the Keeper of the Dungeons. He thought, well, the Keeper has defense 6. He's got 2 wounds, no fate. So he is almost definitely being targeted. So he hid him behind a tent, and he did not move away from that tent for basically the entire game. Unfortunately for him, I had predicted that he would hide the Keeper, and I picked the captain instead, and he had just run the captain in, and eventually Boromir got around and killed the captain. And I was able to get the assassination points there, whilst also getting my oath at the same time, which was duelist. So even though he was almost able to break me, he rolled very terribly on the last turn and wasn't able to break me. But even if he might have, I still had the target kill and the oath from that. So I was able to walk away with an 8-0 win and my oath.
So for my last game, which in round 6, I was actually up on table 4, right next to Devin, who was on table 3, and this is typically when the wings fall off for me, and this was no exception. We were playing Assassination, and I managed to draw a Thranduil's Hall army with Legolas in it. Legolas is not really what you want to have to go up against when you have to avoid getting wounds to particular heroes. And I was playing against Jake. Let me make sure I get Jake's last name right. Let's see. Hang on, Jake. We'll get you there. We'll get you your last name. Sorry, my phone fell asleep and I had to open it up again.
Did I say
Jake Banks.
did I say the name of my opponent?
No.
I feel like I just jumped right into the. I'm so sorry, Eric Rigoli. You were a lovely guy. I just went straight into the final game. But yes, his name is Eric Rigoli. He was from Italy. He was a lovely player, and we had a good game. So moving on to you, sorry, Dad.
Right. Okay. So back to Jake. Jake and his Thranduil's Hall army, which was basically Thranduil and a whole bunch of elves, and Legolas on horse with a whole bunch of elves, and Jake rather wisely castled in a corner, and set
A
up
lot of this going on.
Yeah, set up basically with kind of two wings of shooters, either in the woods or kind of behind a fence with a field of bad ground behind them, and kind of a long line of elves kind of waiting for me to approach. Figuring I was not going to make it across that field with anything resembling an army that was big enough to deal with Thranduil's +1 to wound and fight 6 when we got to the other side. I basically marched around, was able to use some fences that were around that field as cover, managed to march around the side of his line. He kind of reassembled in the field to face me, but at least I avoided. I think I may have lost one guy to shooting in that process. So at least I managed to survive his mass shooting. Charged in. Jake very cleverly started shooting at the obvious target, which was Borgir. So I kept Borgir kind of out of 24 inches of Legolas at all times. And then he played like, all right, well, I guess I'll just shoot at Rutabi, who I figured was his oath person. When he kept this up consistently, however, I realized that Rutabi was probably his target, which is smart because I can play the game without Borgir. I can't play the game and hope to win, at least in this matchup, without Rutabi. So Rutabi is kind of, I can't keep Rutabi outside of 2 feet of Legolas. At that point, Borgir came forward and was able to participate in at least the second half of the game. But Rutabi went in, started fighting. Our lines kind of clashed on a very narrow frontage because of this field with the Emperor and Rutabi in front. I was slowly grinding my way forward until eventually Legolas managed to get his hit on Rutabi, and she failed her last fate and took a wound. At which point Rutabi kind of had to get out of the front line lest she be jumped on by Thranduil and die. And then it was kind of the Emperor grinding forward with my guys. When we got toward the end, when we realized we were going to time out, neither one of us was going to break. I did one last Hail Mary to try and at least get some points. Dismounted the Emperor, kind of ran through a hole in the lines into Thranduil, put a couple pikes behind him, managed to win the combat with my last point of mine striking out, but he had heroic defense and wasn't able to get any wounds. I think I soaked two fate points off of Thranduil, so I had a chance to actually do a wound, but wasn't able to do it. And it was too little, too late at that point. But to add insult to injury, Jake on the last turn of the game goes, "Well, I can't kill Rutabi. She's got 2 wounds left, so I'll just take a pot shot at the Emperor with Legolas's aim shot. Gets the 2+ hit." Proceeds to roll the 6. The Emperor with his 3 fate, because he hasn't been touched throughout the game, proceeds to roll 1-1-2. So he gets the insult. Legolas managed to get him the insult 1 point wound the leader point, along with the 1 point wound the target point. So I lost this one 4-0. But it was a fun game trying to breach Jake's castle. Jake's was a great guy to play against, and I appreciate the game. So that was my article.
That's pretty much the story of how we got second place as a team at Ardacon.
Well, no, it's not all the.
Should we bring up the post on day 1 as well?
No. That post speaks for itself.
Indeed. So Devin, just very quickly, Devin, with a little bit much bravado, decided that he would post on ASBGA about how at the end of day 1 we had 8 people out of 9 on 3 wins, 1 loss. Which I assume was more meant to just update the American.
It was really
pool.
as an update.
I think it was kind of like almost a pity celebration of, so far we're doing good, but like it's not gonna hold.
Yeah.
Like we were second yesterday afterwards. It's like this isn't gonna last.
It definitely was not meant to be a we're this shit.
But that's exactly how people took it.
But despite that,
who'd have thought?
we ended up doing well nonetheless. And the post ended up relatively holding true, I'd say.
Yeah.
We
Yeah.
finished
I was keeping
second
motivation and
overall.
pressure. I was like,
Indeed.
guys, don't make this post like dated by next day.
We're number 2. We're number 2.
Well,
Yeah.
gladly we held up to it. So we ended up getting probably more wins than I was expected. To be honest.
So yeah, I think Italy took the team championship. They were number 1. We were behind number 2, and Germany and friends, which consisted of I think like 3 Germans and 6 friends around the world, came in 3rd. So
I guess the Germans were more consistent than everyone else in the team.
yeah.
All right then. Well then, with that, let us know if you have any questions about Ardacon, and we will definitely make more videos about this event. And with all that being said, we'll talk to you all very soon.
Bye bye, everybody.